This is a review of the Pentax K1000, a camera which was in production from 1976 through 1997, a whopping 21 years.
I want to go over the controls of the camera, talk about its history and my history with it, a little bit about my likes and dislikes, and finally I will show you some pictures I've taken.
We're going to start off on the top plate right side where you're going to find the frame advance lever, and inside the frame advance lever you're going to find the frame counter window. This is my only 35mm camera with the frame counter window inside the frame advance lever. After that, you find the shutter release button and the shutter speed dial, and the shutter speed dial is where you also set the film speed. Shutter speeds available are bulb, 1 second, and then 1/2 second to 1/1000th of a second. And the flash synchronization speed is signified by an X by the 1/60th of a second index. Moving to the front plate, you find the lens release button on the right side and the flash synchronization terminal on the left side. There's not much to see on the back plate. On the bottom plate left to right, you have the film rewind button, the tripod socket, and the battery door. Looking in the viewfinder, you see straight ahead the focusing screen, and to the right, the meter. The meter consists of a needle with a plus and a minus on the scale. If the needle is pointed in the plus direction, you're going to be overexposed, and if it's in the negative direction, you're going to be underexposed.
If you were a photographer in the 80s or 90s, you knew about the Pentax K1000. It was at the top of the recommended cameras list for photography classes probably all over the world. This is because it was all mechanical, all metal, virtually indestructible. It had no program modes, and it was inexpensive. A fully mechanical camera with no automation is what you want to learn photography on. So that's where this camera really shined. Shown? During its 21-year production run, Pentax sold over 3 million of these little guys. Now I'm going to talk about some of the things that this camera is missing. The first is the depth of field preview button. And this is really a thing that I care about and I really like and I use on all my other cameras that have it. And this allows you to see the depth of what's in focus when you're taking your picture. So it's called bokeh, right? You throw the background out of focus and that draws attention to your main subject. So that's kind of important. But this is, again, an entry-level camera, and there is a scale on top of the lens where you can figure it out. You can kind of say, okay, the depth of focus is 3 or 4 or 8 feet, and then you can kind of do some maths and figure it out. But it's definitely missing from this camera. The second is the self-timer, which honestly I never use on cameras, so I'm not worried about that one. And the third control that's missing on the camera is the multiple exposure lever. So typically there's a button, a lever, or something up here on the top that will allow you to expose the same frame more than once. You end up resetting the shutter, but it doesn't advance the film. What's interesting about this camera is in the manual it tells you sort of a workaround or the way to do it with the camera. And the way you do it is you push in the film rewind button while you're cranking. So actually what that ends up doing is it sets the shutter, but it doesn't wind the frame. So you can actually do multiple exposures on the K1000, even though I didn't think you could because there's no control for it. A couple other things this camera's missing. Number one, the full information viewfinder. So when you look in the viewfinder on this camera, all you see is the focusing screen in the center and the meter on the right. You don't get to see the aperture or the shutter speed. So it's not a big deal because it is, again, an entry-level camera. But you have to take your eye away from the viewfinder and look down, and if you want to tweak things, you can then change. You can, determine, oh, my shutter speed's too slow, I'm going to have some blur, or oh, my aperture is too wide open or too closed, I'm going to have bokeh or not bokeh. And the other thing that the camera doesn't have is any facilities for doing a motor drive. So typically you would have a coupler on one side and some contacts, and then there would be a motor drive you could attach to it. But this camera isn't a camera you're really going to shoot sports with anyway, because the top shutter speed is 1/1000th of a second. So this is really a camera you take your time, you frame the picture, you adjust your shutter speed and your aperture, and then you take the picture. One really interesting thing about this camera that sets it apart from all of my other 35mm cameras is the fact that there's no button or lever that turns on the meter. The meter's just always on. So the minute you take off the lens cap, the meter's on. And you put the lens cap back on, the meter drops down. It's still technically on, but I guess it's not drawing from the battery at that point. So this is my only camera that there's just no way to turn on the meter. Most cameras, like the Nikons, you pull out the lever like so, that turns it on, or you half depress the shutter release, that turns it on for like 15 seconds on some of them. On some cameras there's a button over here, you flip it up, like the Sears TLS. The KS2 from Sears, there's a button on the front plate right side. But on this camera, if the lens cap is on or is off, then the meter is doing its thing and you're pulling from the battery. I found this camera at a Goodwill for $14.99, including this 50mm f2 lens. This is a great deal for the camera and pretty typical because I just checked eBay and found many examples for under $50. So I really recommend it. It should work for many, many years, given that it's fully mechanical and it's kind of a legend in the photography world.
It's also worth noting that you want to get a pre-1990s model of the camera, which has the ASHI or Asahi logo above the Pentax, and on the back it says Asahi Optical Company, because cameras after 1990 were made in China and had plastic top plate, bottom plate, and rewind lever. This is a picture of the post-1990 models, which you probably want to avoid.
Thanks for watching my video, and if you liked it, hit the like button and think about subscribing. Also, if you have some ideas for other cameras you'd like me to review, leave some comments down below. Thanks. It was at the top of every list. What? It was at the top of the list of recommended cameras for photography classes. Virtually indestructible and very inexpensive. I think I said inexpensive. Let me just see. Also, if you have some ideas for other videos you'd like to see me, other cameras you'd like to see me review,